Plaza de San Pedro dawned gray that day, as if the sky sensed what the walls of the Vatican already knew but no one dared to say aloud. Pope Francis, after 37 days of hospitalization, returned to the Vatican, not as the pastor who guided his flock firmly, but as a shadow of himself. The disease had left him on the brink of death twice. He could barely stand. His voice had faded under the weight of oxygen therapy, and his body cried for rest. But in the pontifical offices, the machinery did not stop. Decisions, reforms, and appointments were still being issued with his signature, as if the Bishop of Rome were in full power. The corridors of the Vatican, old and full of secrets, vibrated with a constant whisper. Who really governs? On March 7th, while Francis was still receiving intravenous antibiotics and barely responding to stimuli, the creation of an international financial commission was announced. The decree had his signature, but no one had seen him sign it. The document appeared, sealed and definitive, without explanations. Was it really him? Or was someone else, hidden behind the golden curtains, already moving the threads of power? On March 18th, the alarm broke out among the experts in canonical law. A bishop was installed without the corresponding papal bulla. Instead, the nuncio wrote an alternative text, improvised, which he read in the middle of the installation mass. The scandal was immediate. Never in modern times had such irregularity been witnessed. It was as if the head of the church was vacant, without being there. A terrifying contradiction, but the shadows had names. 3 figures emerged from the chaos. The Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State, Monsignor Edgar Penapera, the logistics operator of the Curia, and the Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, theologian of confidence and spokesman, non-official of the Pope. Fernandez, known as Tuccio, broke the silence with a statement that bled the blood of many. The Pope will not give up, he said, but must learn to live and work in another way. He assured that Francisco wants to use the little time he has left to finish his work. An ambiguous, almost funeral phrase which, more than calming, set off alarms. Between the marble walls of the Vatican, the murmur became a conspiracy. It was not the first time that a pope languished while others took the reins. Juan Pablo II had also lived his last years trapped in his body, while his secretary, Stanislaw Dziwisz, ruled in the shadows. But now the situation was even more opaque. There was not a single man but a circle, an invisible court that dictated decisions with the silence of the dying as a backdrop. And in the heart of that labyrinth, Father Juan Cruz Villalón, personal secretary of the Pope, acted like an implacable sentry. Nothing reached the Pope without going through his hands, and nothing came out without his good sight. The royal power had no title or mitre, but it filtered, manipulated, decided. Villalón became the door between Francisco and the world, a silent guardian evoking the figure of the omnipresent Dziwisz. The past was repeated, but with a new script, more murky and concealed. Pre-conclave movements began to be perceived as earthquakes under the surface. Cardinals from all over came to Rome without official reason. They were seen in discreet cafes, in silent corridors, in unannounced meetings. No one spoke of succession, but everyone was preparing for it. The air was full of expectation. The church was moving as if it were already in a vacant seat, although the Pope was still living, locked up, mute, absent. Transition, it was said between teeth, had already begun. A veiled, surreptitious transition in which decisions were made as if they were dictated by a spectrum. Reforms were advancing at a strange pace, as if someone wanted to close a cycle at full speed before the Pope's body gave in completely. Francisco's pontificate, an era marked by ruptures and profound changes, seemed to be being artificially prolonged, not by divine will, but by political strategy. In the gloom of the papal estates, time was distorted. The hours passed without signs of the Holy Father. No angels, no discourse, no blessing. Only impersonal messages, soulless texts that pretended to be normal. The faithful began to notice the absence. The cameras focused on the window of the apostolic palace, but the white figure did not appear. Only the echo of silence responded. The most superstitious spoke of a curse, of a divine punishment for the boldness of reforming the untouchable. Others, more pragmatic, saw in all this a surgical operation to ensure the continuity of a legacy. But they all coincided in something. The Vatican was no longer what it seemed. Peter's throne was occupied by a weakened body, but ruled by hidden voices, by intentions that no one dared to name. The days were getting darker and darker. At Mass, people prayed for the Pope, but the priests did not know what to say to the faithful. Was he really aware? Did he approve of the decisions that were taken in his name? The questions grew, but the answers were lost in a sea of ambiguous messages and deafening silences. One day, a veteran priest of the Vatican, in a low voice, said what many thought. "We do not know if the Pope is still with us or if we are only in his shadow." No one answered. Only the distant sound of a bell resounded in the air, like an omen. The church was in the hands of ghosts, and the whole world watched it without fully understanding what was happening. The end seemed imminent, but no one knew when or how it would come. And in the meantime, the decrees were still being signed, the bishops were still being named, and the circle of power was being strengthened, building its empire in the ruins of a dying pope. The story was repeated, but this time there was no clarity, only a growing fear, a dense darkness that enveloped the Vatican like an eternal fog. The Pope lived, but no longer spoke, no longer decided. And in that absolute silence, others spoke for him. Others decided for him. And the most terrifying thing, no one knew who they really were. As the weeks passed, the murmur became an open fear. The lights in the pontifical apartment remained on all night, and at certain times shadows could be seen crossing the windows. But no one knew who they were. Some said they heard strange noises, low-pitched prayers, whispers of dead tongues. The Swiss guards, normally discreet, now spoke to each other in codes that even their superiors seemed not to understand. One night, a young priest who served in the curia was found in a state of shock, murmuring incoherences. He said he had seen the Holy Father sitting on his throne, surrounded by hooded figures. He said that the Pope looked him directly in the eyes and spoke to him without moving his lips. No one wanted to officially record the incident. He was sent to a monastery in southern Italy, far from Rome. He was never heard from again. The feeling that something deeply unnatural was happening grew with each dawn. In the Vatican library, certain manuscripts were moved and hidden without leaving a trace. Ancient texts on the Pope in a coma, on the sleeping pontiff of medieval legends, began to circulate among the most erudite. Some claimed that the Church had faced similar situations in dark centuries, and that only silence had avoided a quake. But this time, silence seemed to be an accomplice of an operation that did not seek to preserve unity, but to control the narrative. An operation that used the Pope's living body as a symbol, while his mind and will were irrelevant. The white figure was just that, a figure, and while the cardinals aligned themselves, made pacts and promised support for a conclave, not declared, the figure of Francis became a myth. He was no longer talked about in the present. Even his closest ones began to refer to his decisions as the legacy of the Pope, as if he had already left. What happened next, few saw it coming.